In the wild valleys of Montana, a weary veteran and his loyal German shepherd stumbled upon an old cabin by a quiet stream, a place long forgotten by time. Inside, they found dust, silence, and a secret that would change everything. A hidden letter left by a man lost to the flood, a woman's face painted in sorrow, and proof that even broken souls can be led by God's unseen hand. As the river whispered its truth, Jack realized this cabin wasn't just shelter, it was a message. A reminder that God's miracles don't always come through thunder or fire, but through peace, healing, and the courage to start again. If you believe that faith can turn loneliness into light, don't scroll away. Hit subscribe, share, and comment Amen to spread this story of hope, faith, and redemption. May the Lord bless and protect everyone watching. The wind cut through the valley of northern Montana like a blade, cold and merciless. The snow had stopped falling hours ago, yet it still blanketed the world in thick silence. The pines stood motionless under the gray sky, their heavy branches drooping with frost. The only movement came from a solitary man and his dog trudging along an old logging road, their breath rising like smoke in the frozen air. Jack Miller, 40 years old, had the kind of face time had chiseled into hard lines. Once a U.S. Army sergeant, his years overseas had left him with more scars on the inside than out. His eyes, a steel gray that mirrored the mountains, carried both vigilance and fatigue. His beard was rough and flecked with silver, his jaw strong but tired. The war had taught him how to survive in hostile lands, but it had also taught him how lonely silence could be. Since returning home, home had become a word without meaning. He'd sold what little he had, packed his old truck with supplies, and set out west, looking for a reason to stop running from memories he couldn't forget. Walking beside him was Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a coat of black and tan, his fur thick against the cold, his eyes bright and intelligent. Rex had served with Jack in the K-9 division. Loyal, disciplined, and unyielding, he bore a faint scar across his muzzle, a mark from an explosion that nearly took his life in their last mission together. To Jack, Rex wasn't just a dog. He was the last living piece of the world Jack once knew. Every step they took together through the wilderness was an unspoken promise between two soldiers who had seen too much. The day had stretched long, and the fading sun dipped behind the peaks, staining the snow in orange and violet. Jack's boots crunched through the frozen path as he scanned the horizon for shelter. His breath came in shallow bursts. The truck had broken down miles back, and they had been walking for 2 days, surviving on canned beans and melted snow. Rex stayed close, ears perked, nose twitching, sensing his master's exhaustion. "We'll find something soon, buddy," Jack murmured through chapped lips. His voice was deep but gentle, a tone shaped by command, but softened by years of solitude. The forest thickened, shadows stretching longer. Then, just beyond a stand of aspens, Jack noticed something, a faint plume of smoke rising lazily into the cold air. He slowed, signaling Rex to stop. The dog crouched low, eyes fixed forward, a silent sentinel. "Easy," Jack whispered. They advanced cautiously through the undergrowth until the shape of a small cabin emerged. Its roof sagging under snow, its chimney cracked but still breathing a faint thread of smoke, perhaps from wood long burned. The cabin stood by a half-frozen stream that murmured beneath a thin layer of ice. The sight struck Jack like a memory from another life, a life before the war, when warmth and stillness still existed. Approached slowly, the snow creaking beneath his boots. The front door hung slightly ajar, the wood swollen from years of rain. "Stay," Jack ordered softly, and Rex obeyed, sitting near the porch, alert. Jack pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale but dry. Dust motes floated in the last shafts of daylight. The room was small, a single bed against the wall, a stone fireplace, and a table with 2 wooden chairs, one missing a leg. There was a faint smell of pine and age. On the table lay an oil lamp, cold and empty, and beside it, a small photograph in a cracked frame, a man and a woman smiling under the summer sun. The man wore overalls and a painter's cap. Jack frowned slightly. Whoever lived here had long gone, but something about the cabin felt untouched by time, like it had been waiting. Rex stepped inside, sniffing the floorboards, tail low, cautious but curious. "Seems safe," Jack muttered, closing the door against the cold. He dropped his backpack by the table and crouched by the fireplace. Within minutes, dry twigs and a bit of kerosene brought the first sparks to life. The flames danced, chasing shadows up the walls. Rex lay down by the hearth, resting his head on his paws, his ears still twitching at every sound from outside. Jack sat on the floor beside him, stretching his tired legs toward the fire. The warmth seeped into his bones, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. "We might stay here for a bit," he said softly, glancing at Rex. The dog gave a low, content rumble in response, an answer of loyalty and trust. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside, the small cabin offered a fragile peace. Jack leaned back against the wall, eyes tracing the photograph again. He wondered who the couple were, what had happened to them, and why their home stood untouched in the middle of nowhere. There was something both comforting and haunting about the place. The sound of the nearby stream carried faintly through the walls, mingling with the crackle of firewood. It was the first lullaby he'd heard in years. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped. Jack added another log to the fire and pulled his old army coat tighter around him. The fatigue of the long journey washed over him. He lay on the wooden floor near the fire, one hand resting on Rex's back. "Good boy," he whispered. "We made it." Rex's breathing slowed, his body warm against the cold air. The firelight flickered across the walls, casting the shadows of man and dog, 2 souls finally finding rest after wandering too long. Outside, the stream whispered, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Jack's eyes drifted shut. For the first time in years, he didn't dream of war or loss. He dreamed of stillness, of snow, of peace, and of a cabin by the water that seemed to remember what warmth felt like. The morning came slowly, the mist rolling off the stream and seeping through the cracks of the cabin like breath from another world. Jack awoke to the soft sound of water trickling and the faint crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. Rex lay curled beside the hearth, his ears twitching as the first light filtered in through the frosted window. Jack stretched, the stiffness in his back reminding him how long it had been since he'd slept in real warmth. The cabin felt both foreign and oddly familiar, as if it had been waiting for someone to wake it from a long slumber. He stood and looked around, his soldier's instincts stirring, a need to clean, to organize, to make order from ruin. Dust floated in thin beams of light. A layer of frost had crept along the inside of the windows. He found an old broom behind the door and began sweeping, each stroke stirring the scent of old pine and thyme. Rex followed him, sniffing every corner as if cataloging the house's secrets. The place was small. One main room, a sleeping loft above reached by a ladder, and a small kitchen area with a rusted stove. In the corner stood something unexpected. An upright piano, Its wood faded and one leg splintered. Jack wiped the dust from the keys and pressed one. The sound came out faint and ghostly, like the echo of a memory. "You had music once," he murmured, half to himself. He kept cleaning, stacking fallen books, patching a broken window with a plank he found outside. Beneath the grime, the cabin began to show its bones. Sturdy, hand-built, honest. By the third day, the place had begun to feel alive again. Jack sat at the table, eating canned soup heated on the fire. The table itself was solid oak, scratched and scarred by years of use. As he wiped its surface clean, his hand brushed against something beneath. A small notch carved into the wood, shaped like the letter M. He frowned. "Someone marked this," he whispered. Rex perked up, tilting his head as if listening too. On a nearby shelf, Jack found a leather-bound journal, the cover cracked with age. Inside, the pages were yellowed but intact. The handwriting was elegant and careful, written in dark ink that had only just begun to fade. The first line read, "I came here to paint what silence feels like." The name signed below was Thomas Hale. Jack leaned back in his chair, intrigued. He read further, entries describing the sound of rain on the roof, the changing light on the stream, and sketches of mountains drawn in the margins. As the days passed, Thomas's tone changed. The later entries grew darker, filled with restlessness and loneliness. "The storms speak louder each night," one passage read. "I fear I am no longer alone here." Jack closed the book, unsettled. He glanced at Rex, who had been pacing near the fireplace, nose to the floorboards. "What is it, boy?" he asked. Rex scratched at the boards, whining softly. Jack grabbed a small axe and pried one of the loose planks open. Beneath it was a narrow space filled with dust and old air. He reached down and pulled out a wooden box, its lid sealed by rusted hinges. Inside were half-finished canvases, their paint cracked, but colors still vivid. Portraits of mountains, rivers, and a woman's face rendered with aching tenderness. There was also a small photograph, a man with dark hair and paint on his hands, standing beside a woman with soft curls and a gentle smile. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "For my love, Evelyn, until I find peace." Jack stared at the picture for a long time. He didn't know why, but he felt the weight of those words pressing on him. Perhaps it was because he, too, had once made promises he couldn't keep. The war had taken more than comrades. It had taken his sense of belonging, the hope that life could be rebuilt. Now, standing in the ruins of another man's solitude, he felt a strange kinship with the long-gone painter. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Jack sealed the floorboard and sat by the fire, the journal open on his lap. Rex lay nearby, chin resting on his paws, eyes fixed on his master as if sensing the pull of memory. "What do you think, Rex?" Jack asked quietly. "Did he ever find his peace?" The dog blinked, then looked toward the door, ears twitching at something outside. Jack followed his gaze but saw nothing, just the slow drift of snow and the outline of trees swaying in the wind. That night, he dreamed of brushstrokes on canvas, mountains, rivers, and faces fading into mist. When he woke before dawn, the air in the cabin felt different, lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Jack stepped outside, his boots crunching on the snow. The sky was pale, and the stream shimmered with early light. He turned back to the cabin, smoke curling gently from the chimney, and whispered, "Maybe we're not the first souls this place has tried to save." The storm rolled in just after nightfall, sweeping through the valley like a wounded beast. The wind rattled the shutters, and the rain came hard, hammering the tin roof in a relentless rhythm. Jack sat near the fireplace, the journal of Thomas Hale open on his lap, its pages trembling with each gust of wind that slipped through the cracks. Rex lay beside him, his body tense, ears flicking at every sound. The air inside the cabin carried the damp scent of pine and smoke. The fire cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, making the room seem alive with ghosts. Jack had spent the past few days reading through the artist's final entries. The tone of the writing had shifted from poetic solitude to an unease that grew darker with every page. Lines about strange noises in the forest, lights near the stream, whispers beneath the rain. Maybe he was losing his mind, Jack muttered, though something in his gut said otherwise. Rex suddenly lifted his head, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. His eyes locked on the window. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered, rising to his feet. The German shepherd's fur bristled along his back as he barked sharply, the sound cutting through the storm. Jack grabbed his flashlight and his old revolver from the table, instinctively slipping into the alertness of a soldier. When he stepped outside, the rain hit him like a wall. The flashlight's beam sliced through the darkness, revealing the trees bending under the wind. The stream had swollen, its current fierce and brown, crashing against rocks. Then he saw it. Footprints, fresh ones, deep in the mud, circling the cabin. Human. He crouched, running his fingers along the edges of the print. "Someone's been here." Rex barked again, this time near the path leading to the water. Jack followed, his boots sinking in the wet ground. The forest around him groaned with the weight of the storm, and the smell of wet earth filled his lungs. When he reached the bank, he froze. A small wooden boat had lodged against the rocks, half filled with rainwater, its hull cracked and splintered. It must have drifted down the stream from somewhere higher up the mountain. Jack stepped closer, his flashlight catching the edge of something inside, a small box wrapped in oilcloth. He lifted it carefully. The box was about the size of a Bible, carved from oak, and though aged, it was still sealed tight. The initials TH were faintly burned into the lid. He carried it back inside, setting it on the table while Rex shook off water near the door. Jack pried open the lid with his knife. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, its ink smudged by moisture but still legible. It was a letter, never sent. The handwriting matched the one in the journal. Thomas Hale's. Jack read aloud softly. "My dearest Evelyn, I write this in hope that one day our daughter Margaret might find the truth of what became of me. The river grows wild tonight, and I fear it will take everything I built. If you ever find this, know that I did not run. I stayed to save the cabin, our home, our memory." Jack's throat tightened. "Margaret," he repeated quietly. He had a daughter. Rex watched him silently, head tilted. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the letter as the fire popped and cracked beside him. The thought of a man dying alone, clinging to a home that love had built, hit too close to his own truth. He reached for the old photograph he'd found before, Thomas and Evelyn smiling by the cabin, and now he imagined a little girl's face between them. A family lost to time and water. Outside, the storm eased, the rain softening into mist. Jack stepped onto the porch, Rex close beside him. The forest had gone still, eerily still. The footprints had already begun to wash away, but the unease lingered. "We're not alone out here," he murmured. Somewhere in the dark woods, a branch snapped. Jack raised the flashlight, but saw nothing, only the trees dripping in silence, He felt the familiar prickle of instinct on the back of his neck, the same feeling he used to get before ambushes overseas. "Come on, boy," he said. "Inside." Back by the fire, Jack placed the letter carefully beside the journal. He stared at them both, fragments of another man's life. The rain whispered against the roof, and through the sound, he thought he heard something faint. A voice, maybe, carried by the wind, or perhaps just the river speaking through the storm. Whatever it was, it felt less like fear and more like a calling. As he drifted toward uneasy sleep, the shadows in the cabin seemed to breathe. The past had found him, and it wasn't done telling its story yet. The days that followed the storm were quiet and strangely bright. The snow melted in thin streams that ran through the forest like veins of light, and the cabin, once ghostly and gray, began to breathe again. Jack stood outside one morning, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand, the scent of sawdust and wet pine filling the air. His face had grown leaner, sun catching the silver in his beard, and his eyes carried a calm determination that hadn't been there when he first arrived. He was fixing a broken window frame, whistling faintly, something he hadn't done in years. Rex trotted nearby, tail swishing, dragging a short log toward the porch as if to help. "You're a good worker," Jack said with a grin, patting the dog's head. Rex's ears perked and his tongue lolled out in the faint warmth of spring. Jack had found new purpose in the rhythm of rebuilding. He sanded the door, patched the roof, and repainted the shutters a deep forest green. Around the porch, he cleared the old weeds and planted wildflowers he'd gathered from the meadow: lupines, daisies, and lavender. When the wind passed through, it carried their scent across the yard and into the open windows. Inside, he hung Thomas Hale's half-finished paintings on the walls. One by one, they filled the silence with color. The mountains at dusk, the river in autumn, a woman's smile frozen in gentle brushstrokes. The cabin was no longer just shelter. It was beginning to feel like home. That afternoon, Jack was splitting firewood when Rex suddenly stopped mid-stride, ears pricked, gaze fixed toward the trail. Moments later, a faint voice called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Jack straightened, axe resting on his shoulder. From between the trees came a figure, a woman wrapped in a long wool coat, moving carefully over the uneven ground. As she came closer, Jack saw that she was elderly, perhaps in her late 60s, with silver hair braided neatly beneath a knitted hat. Her face was lined with years, but gentle, her eyes bright and searching, the kind that seemed to recognize kindness in others before it was shown. She carried a wicker basket and leaned slightly on a wooden cane. "Afternoon, ma'am," Jack said, lowering his axe. "Didn't mean to startle you." The woman smiled faintly. "You didn't. I just wasn't expecting to see anyone living here." Her voice was soft but steady, with that soothing cadence of someone who had lived through both joy and loss. "This old cabin's been empty since before the flood." Jack blinked. "The flood? You mean the one that hit the valley years ago?" She nodded, eyes scanning the freshly painted porch and the flowers swaying nearby. "You fixed it up beautifully. It looks just like it used to." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out, touching the railing as though greeting an old friend. "My name's Margaret Hale," she said. "This was my brother's cabin." Jack froze. The name hit him, like an echo from the journal and the letter. "Your brother? Thomas?" Her eyes met his, and for a long moment, neither spoke. "So you found his things," she said quietly. "The journal? The paintings?" "Yes," Jack answered softly. "And the letter. It washed up in a box down by the stream." Margaret lowered herself onto the porch step, setting her basket beside her. Inside were fresh bread and a jar of preserves, the simple gifts of someone who still believed in the importance of offering kindness. "He was a good man," she said after a while. "Troubled, but kind. He built this place after our parents passed, said he wanted to live where the world was still honest. After his wife Evelyn died, he withdrew from everyone. I used to bring him food every few weeks, but one night the river rose. The flood took the bridge out and he never came back." Jack listened silently, his hands resting on his knees. The weight of her words seemed to settle over the cabin like mist. "I think he tried to save this place," Jack said. "The letter said he stayed behind to protect it." Margaret's lips trembled into a sad smile. That sounds like him, always stubborn when it came to the things he loved. She looked around the cabin again, eyes glistening. "It's strange, seeing it alive again. It feels like he finally found peace." Rex walked up to her then, sniffing her hand before resting his head on her knee. Margaret chuckled softly. "And who's this fine soldier?" "Rex," Jack said. "He's been my shadow for 5 years now." She stroked the dog's fur gently. "He reminds me of Thomas's old shepherd, always by his side, too." They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the stream and the rustle of trees filling the air. Finally, Margaret stood. "You've done something special here, Mr. Jack Miller." "Well, Mr. Miller," she said, meeting his gaze with quiet warmth. "Maybe you were meant to come here. Sometimes the good Lord puts people in the places others left unfinished. Maybe you were sent to finish what Thomas started." Jack didn't know how to respond, but as he watched her walk away down the path, her silver hair catching the sunlight, he felt something stir inside him, a peace he hadn't known since before the war. The cabin no longer felt haunted. It felt blessed. That evening, Jack lit the lamp by the window, and for the first time, its glow shone not as a warning to darkness, but as a sign of life. Rex lay at his feet, and Jack whispered, "Maybe she's right, boy. Maybe we didn't find this place by accident." Spring came quietly to the Montana Valley, washing the world in soft greens and gold. The snow that had once buried the cabin melted into a ribbon of clear water that danced past the porch, carrying with it the songs of a new beginning. The air smelled of pine, wet soil, and wildflowers. Jack sat on the porch steps with a mug of black coffee, his rough hands wrapped around the warmth. His hair had grown a bit longer, streaked with silver, and his beard now neatly trimmed. There was peace in his face, an ease that had not existed when he first wandered into these woods months ago. Beside him, Rex lay stretched out lazily, one paw over the other, his fur glistening in the morning sun. The dog's ears flicked whenever a bird chirped, but otherwise he was content, breathing in rhythm with his master. Both of them finally settled in a place that felt earned. Jack looked out across the stream. The cabin stood proudly now, its once weathered walls glowing with fresh paint and life. The porch railing he had built with his own hands held flower boxes full of daisies and bluebells, swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, the scent of Margaret's baked bread still lingered from the day before. The old woman had made it her habit to visit every few weeks, bringing food and stories about the town nearby. Jack had grown fond of her visits, the warmth in her laughter, the way she spoke about her brother with a tenderness that time hadn't dulled. That morning, he saw her approaching again, walking slowly along the path that followed the stream. Margaret wore a light green shawl over her shoulders, her silver hair braided as always. The sunlight made her skin glow like parchment touched by gold. She waved as she neared, her cane tapping softly against the stones. "Good morning, Jack," she called out, her voice bright. "And good morning to you too, soldier," she added, smiling at Rex, who barked twice in happy recognition. "Morning, Margaret," Jack said, standing to greet her. "You're up early." "Couldn't waste a morning like this," she replied, her eyes sweeping over the cabin with quiet pride. "I brought you something." She handed him a small, wrapped bundle. Inside was a framed sketch, a simple pencil drawing of the cabin by the stream. "I found it among Thomas's old things," she said softly. "He drew this years before the flood. I think he wanted to remember this place exactly as it was." Jack traced the lines with his thumb. The porch, the trees, even a faint outline of a man and a dog beside the stream. "He must have loved it here," Jack said. Margaret nodded. "He did. He just didn't know how to hold on to peace when it came." Her voice grew tender. "I think maybe that's what you've done, Jack. You've given peace back to this place." They went inside, and Jack hung the drawing beside the photograph of Thomas and Evelyn, and the letter he had framed weeks earlier. The small wall of memories looked like a shrine, not of grief, but of gratitude. The morning light filtered through the windows, landing on the faces in the photos, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped to watch. Later, they sat by the stream, Margaret sipping tea while Jack tended the small vegetable garden he had started. The soil was rich, and shoots of green beans, carrots, and lettuce were already pushing through. Rex patrolled the area like a proud guardian, occasionally chasing a butterfly or wading into the shallow water. "You've built quite a life here," Margaret said, watching him work. Jack smiled faintly. "It's simple, and for once that's enough." He paused, looking up at the mountains in the distance. "I used to think peace was something you had to search for, something you earned after surviving enough pain. But maybe it's the other way around. Maybe peace finds you when you finally stop running." Margaret looked at him with quiet admiration. "You remind me of Thomas," she said, "but you're the ending he never got." As the sun began to set, she stood to leave. "You'll come by town one of these days, won't you? Folks are starting to ask about the man who brought life back to the Hale cabin." Jack chuckled. "Maybe one day. For now, I think I'll stay right here." She smiled knowingly. "I figured you'd say that." She patted Rex's head. "Keep him company, won't you?" The dog barked softly, as if in promise. After Margaret disappeared down the trail, the world grew still again. Jack went back to the porch and sat down, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sky turned gold, then rose, then deep amber as the sun sank behind the pines. The stream shimmered like glass, and the air was thick with the scent of spring. He whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe God doesn't give us the place we want, but the one we need." Rex lifted his head, ears twitching, as if he understood every word. When dawn came the next morning, it painted the valley in silver light. Jack opened the door and stepped outside with his coffee. Rex bounded down to the water, barking playfully, his reflection dancing on the surface. The world felt whole. The cabin by the stream was no longer haunted by loss. It was alive with grace. Sometimes, God doesn't lead us to the life we dream of. He leads us to the life that heals us. Jack didn't find the cabin by accident. He was guided there, to a place where the broken could be mended, where a forgotten home became whole again. It's a reminder that even when we wander through loneliness, through storms and silence, God's hand is never far away. He works in quiet miracles, not with thunder or lightning, but through moments of peace, through the warmth of a dog's loyalty, through a stranger's kindness, and through the courage to begin again. And maybe that's the miracle of life itself. Not that pain disappears, but that grace appears. Just when we think we've run out of places to go. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment about where you're watching from, and let's fill this world with stories of faith, kindness, and second chances. May the Lord bless and protect everyone watching. If you believe that God still works miracles in ordinary lives, don't scroll away. Hit subscribe, share, and comment Amen to help spread this message of faith, love, and redemption.